Prakriti Rajbhandari. She's working for the construction firm ABARI to create sustainable villages in Nepal. With us from London is Indy Hothi. He is a trustee with the international humanitarian aid organisation Khalsa Aid. And from San Francisco, we're joined by Olga Murray. She's the founder and honorary president of the Nepal Youth Foundation. Thanks all for joining us. Prakriti, let's go to you first of all, because you're on the ground there in Kathmandu. A month on two very, very big earthquakes. What's the mood like there in the capital and beyond of the Nepalese people?
How it is like here in people. People are pretty paranoid here still, and we can still find people living outside in tents, and they're still scared to go back to their homes. And because most of the homes here in capital and in the periphery had been affected, and after the second aftershock of around 7.4 magnitude, the condition has become worse. However, at least in capital, the lives are going back to normal, but in other affected villages, people are still struggling.
What do people need most as the monsoon season arrives, Prakriti?
Yes, we've been on the field for quite a while now, and people, what they need the most at this moment is transitional shelters, because they all know that monsoon is coming and it is going to hit hard. So they all want to be prepared and have a roof so that they can at least go through the monsoon.
Olga Murray in San Francisco, your relationship with Nepal and its people goes back decades. You actually have a house there. You've taken in some people over this past month. Just how desperate has the situation been, and what is needed now in your view?
Well, I agree with Prakriti that it's shelter that's needed the most. The monsoon rains are coming. People are not going to be able to cook outside, and it's going to be disastrous. There are going to be more landslides, and people are going to need shelter desperately.
Indy Hothi in London, shelter seems to be top of the list at the moment, but I understand that aid organisations and the Nepalese government can't build the infrastructure quickly enough to build these houses. What can be done? Is this really a race against time? You're headed there in a couple of weeks.
That's correct, Nathan. The sense of urgency to get shelter built for individuals that have been affected by the earthquake is extremely high. Like people have mentioned, the monsoon season is approaching, and we urgently need to get people into safe accommodation so that they're not further affected by the oncoming weather conditions.
And what about the threat of disease, considering many people still not under shelter and the weather?
Exactly. So, you know, that will further compound the issue if you have people who are still displaced out in sort of tent areas and don't have the correct sanitation facilities. Will lead to disease, etc. So in terms of Khalsa Aid, the organisation has been providing three main relief programs. Number one is sort of free food to individuals based out in Nepal that have been displaced, working with the local army to provide that food. The reason being previously, aid agencies were just providing water and biscuits, and that's not really a long-term sustainable solution. So Khalsa Aid have been working with the army there on the ground to provide hot nutritious meals for the individuals there. And also second on our list is providing temporary shelter. So we've got teams of relief workers who are experienced with construction from the UK who are flown over to build temporary homes. Right. And so far we've built 300 temporary shelters.
300 is a large amount, but the need is great. Prakriti, you know, I've been to Nepal before, people on this show have, but it's really quite a logistical nightmare, isn't it, dealing with Nepal in terms of just how inhospitable the terrain is outside of Kathmandu. Is that proving more and more difficult?
Oh yes, definitely. Even when we were trying to reach out to people in these affected areas, we were there on the field on the third day of this big earthquake, and it was really hard to reach these villages because already the roads there are not pitched, or it's not easy, and because of earthquake and rain, the roads are getting worse, and there's been more landslides, and we had to drop aid materials through helicopters, and we had to go through a lot of roadblocks. So yes, this has been a very big issue in terms of getting aid to people in need. Government, and I believe all the local organizations like us, are facing a lot of problem in actually transporting these relief materials to these affected areas.
Olga, where are the areas most in need still, considering these logistical problems and remoteness of some of the villages?
Well, I think the most affected areas are Sindupolchak, Gorkha, and Kavre, they're very, very badly affected. And we're trying to concentrate on children. There are children there whose parents have been killed or injured. They have nothing to eat. They have no place to sleep. They have nobody to protect them. And so we have set up shelters for children in Gorkha and Dolakha, where these children will stay until they can either be reunited with some family, or we'll take custody of them ultimately if we can't find family for them.
Yeah, there's a big fear of human trafficking, hasn't there, been
Yes.
in Nepal? It's a problem even without all this dislocation of families. I understand you had some potentially trafficked girls staying in your house, taking
Yes.
refuge. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, the police called us last week, and they said they had arrested some traffickers with 35 young girls from these affected villages, and they didn't know what to do with the girls, so they asked us to take custody. And I left 4 days after the earthquake, so my house was available, although it's badly damaged. So, but I have a large garden, and we set up tents on the grounds to shelter these girls until the police could reunite them with their families. And the police said, all right, we've reunited these girls with their families, but be ready to take more, because this is going to happen again.
These girls
it's hard to believe.
These girls are destined where usually, and just how big a problem is this going to be ongoing?
These girls are destined for India mostly, and it's going to be a terrible problem, because there are going to be so many young girls who are going to be left without any protection whatsoever. And so we're trying to step in the villages where things are the worst, and provide shelter and take custody of these children temporarily until we can find family for them, or if not, we'll take responsibility.
Indy Hothi, do you agree that focusing on children is one of the priorities going forward?
Of course, children are top priority, because they are the future generations, and a lot of children may have lost their parents as a result of the earthquake, and these individuals are extremely vulnerable. You know, we appreciate that all victims of the earthquake are vulnerable, but children much more so.
I want to go back to Prakriti in Kathmandu. Some logistical areas have been opened up. For example, the road now between China and Nepal is open. There are other roads from neighbouring countries too that now are becoming passable. Is that going to make a difference?
Yes, I definitely believe that, like I said earlier, it was really hard for us to deliver these relief goods to affected areas, and I believe that because at this moment we have been getting very good response from international community, and given that the roads are now open and it's more easier to reach to these affected areas, I believe that it will only accelerate the whole process of rescue, relief and reconstruction.
Olga, do you think the international response has been enough, considering the devastation that we've seen?
Yes, I think it has been very, very good, actually. It didn't come in for a few days, and part of it was due to the incapacity of the Kathmandu airport. I believe there's only one runway for big international planes, and it was having some problems. But I think the international community responded very well, although I understand that the call for help has not, the amount that they want to raise for help has not been met yet.
Yeah, I mean, In these crises, there's obviously a short-term solutions, getting emergency aid in and rescue teams, but there's also got to be a long-term commitment. Is that right, Olga?
Absolutely. There's a long-term commitment for children who have lost protection and for shelter. And we have some plans to build 1,000 homes with the prefab homes for people, teach the people themselves to rebuild their homes and do this for 1,000 families, and to build 50 schools. 24,000 schoolrooms have been demolished.
Back to the heat. 2 earthquakes within the last month have devastated Kathmandu and villages across Nepal. The United Nations and Nepali government are appealing for more than $400 million in financial aid to address basic needs such as food, water and shelter. We continue our conversation now with Prakriti Rajbhandari. She's Nepalese and working with a construction firm ABARI to rebuild Nepal. From San Francisco, we're joined by Olga Murray. She's dedicated much of her life to helping impoverished children in Nepal. And with us from London is Indy Hothi. He's with the international charity Khalsa Aid. Prakriti, I want to go back to you in Nepal. Olga said before the break that it's really about helping people help themselves in the long term. Would you agree with that? Does the Nepalese people need to be in charge of their own destiny when it comes to rebuilding?
Oh yes, ABARI definitely supports owner-driven reconstruction, and it is more like giving people, the victims of earthquake, the choice of how they want to reconstruct, how they want to reinforce the salvaged material that is already available. And I believe that all the solutions might not be relevant to the context of each villages, and it's very important that these villages have option of reconstructing in their own terms, and ABARI definitely supports that.
Indy Hothi in London, how do we avoid, as the international community, some of the mistakes that were made in, for example, Haiti after the earthquake when it comes to rebuilding in Nepal?
I think number one is around looking at the long-term economic growth and really reinforcing relief programs to support that. So, for example, if you're rebuilding homes, as we previously talked about, looking to work with local communities and organisations to really use that local knowledge and make sure that we're providing benefit to the community rather than blindly providing aid.
Olga, this is going to require long-term commitments, we said just before the break. I understand the government have asked for about $2 billion in terms of longer-term aid. We're going to see a donor conference here, aren't we? We're going to have to see some sort of coming together of the international community long-term?
Yes, I think that Nepal, even before the earthquake, was heavily dependent on the donor community and NGOs, and much more so in view of the situation on the ground now. And it has to be a long-term commitment, because people are going to need homes, shelters, schools, everything you can imagine for a community. And I'm totally convinced, as Prakriti said, that it's the Nepalese themselves who know what they need and how to do it. And they're the ones who need to be in charge.
Olga, though, neighbouring countries like China and India have been quick. They can help long-term too, right?
Yes, absolutely. India particularly was there within 24 hours. Yes, they can help a lot. They have much easier access than other means of, because, as I said, the airport is really inadequate to a very large relief effort.
Prakriti, what about the situation in Nepal going forward? Do you think that even though there's been 2 terrible tragedies, this provides an opportunity, if you like, for Nepal as development to get on the right track, and for the eyes of the world and also the politicians that often disagree in Nepal to focus on the future of Nepal together?
Yes, definitely. I believe that with every disaster, we also have an opportunity to bring huge changes. And in past years, at least in Kathmandu, the homes that we've been building are not being monitored. And now we know that we have seen the consequences of not monitoring our activities. And I believe that this is the opportunity for local people and also for Nepal government to think of ways to avoid such accidents or such casualties in near future. And I believe that people will be more aware in terms of what sort of shelters they must be building for themselves. Yes.
Olga, obviously the biggest industry to be hit is the tourism industry. Can that get back on its feet considering the amount of damage? It does bring in so much foreign currency for Nepal.
Yes, Nepal is heavily dependent on the tourist industry. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a while before it gets back on its feet because people will be afraid to come, and so much of the infrastructure has been destroyed. But it's a wonderful country to visit, and I think I hope that soon it will be back on its feet again. It's absolutely critical to Nepal's economic survival.
Indy, do you think the focus on Nepal will begin to wane after this first month, or do you think that because of the scale of the tragedy and all the pictures that we've seen and the plight of the people, that Nepal will get what it needs long-term going forward, including, as Olga said, people going back and going on a holiday there?
Well, from our perspective, Khalsa Aid will be providing medium-term relief over the coming years to support the sort of rebuild of Nepal. But from previous experience in other countries and disaster zones, you do over time see support and humanitarian aid in regions diminish over time. But we hope that with the scale and extent of damage in Nepal, that people will come together to support the country. In terms of the long-term benefit, I totally agree that there needs to also be a focus on buildings such as hospitals, offices, and schools as well, to ensure that the country can get back on its feet, and also to help to develop the tourism industry again.
Olga, you know, what's been incredible about this last month is the resilience and the tenacity of Nepal's people. You've seen and heard many examples. What sticks out for you in terms of bravery and the Nepalese spirit?
Well, I've been coming to Nepal and living there part-time for 30 years, and this is one of the most outstanding qualities of Nepalese people, including especially Nepalese children. They are almost optimistic by nature, I would say, and very, very resilient. The children at our children's homes, if what happened to them happened to kids in the West, they'd be on a psychiatrist's couch for the rest of their lives. These kids just snap back, and that was then and this is now, and they're happy, adjusted children. So I think the Nepali people are particularly resilient, and I think they will, and they have a very strong sense of community. And I think those two things will really help to overcome the huge psychological traumas that they have faced. Even I was there for the earthquake. I left out for the first earthquake. I left after 4 days, and I'm a San Francisco girl, so I'm accustomed to shaking. But every night for 2 weeks, I woke up and my bed was shaking. I thought my bed was shaking. So I can imagine, you know, there've been over 200 aftershocks. I can imagine the trauma now, but they have a very resilient and very cooperative society, and I think that will help them to get over these problems.
Prakriti, in Kathmandu, it must be a tremendously stressful situation, sleeping outside all the time, feeling the earth move as it still does, worried about another earthquake. How are the people coping and showing that resilience day to day where you are?
Yes, as we were working on ground, and even when we were there on third day of earthquake, we could see that people were already starting to help each other and thinking on how to build transitional shelters for themselves to go through the monsoon season. And as we sent our teams in Sindhupalchok, which is one of the very affected area, so neighbors were helping each other to pull out salvage materials, and there were little children helping their parents to pull out whatever remains of their belongings. And And it is commendable to see that people have actually come together helping each other, and young volunteers from the capital, even though they have lost their own homes, are now reaching out to most affected areas, and yes, they are helping each other.
Indy Hothi, final word in London. You're heading out to the region. What are you going to be doing there, and what do you hope to see in Nepal in another month's time as they move beyond this tragedy?
Yes, Nathan, so I'll be heading out in the next 2 weeks to support Khalsa Aid's relief efforts in the region. So number one, we'll be focusing on providing hot meals to people that have been displaced by the earthquake. Number two, we'll be providing shelter and constructing shelter for local rural communities. And number three, we'll also be providing aid such as infant formula, antiseptic materials to local hospitals in conjunction with the World Health Organization. What I'd really like to see is more of a combined effort from a number of international NGOs and local community organizations. What we've previously experienced is that disconnected approach sometimes can lead to issues in terms of providing effective relief on the ground.
Indy Hothi in London, Prakriti Rajbhandari in Kathmandu, and Olga Murray in San Francisco. Thank you so much for joining us.